Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and today we're following the money, about $1.1 billion of it, that China's biggest tech giants just lit on fire in the most expensive AI marketing battle the world has ever seen.
And I'm Maya Clarity. That's not hyperbole, Alex. According to Morgan Stanley estimates reported by the South China Morning Post, Alibaba, Baidu, ByteDance, and Tencent collectively spent around 8 billion yuan during the Chinese New Year holiday period alone, all to shove their AI assistants into the hands of hundreds of millions of consumers. The question we're digging into today, was any of it worth it?
Because here's what makes this story so fascinating. This isn't just a marketing story. This is a story about how the world's second-largest economy is trying to build its AI future from the consumer up, and whether you can actually buy your way to artificial intelligence dominance with red packets and Spring Festival giveaways.
We've been going through the data, talking to analysts, and looking at what happened after the fireworks faded and the holiday ended. The picture that's emerging is complex, messy, and honestly, it tells us a lot about where the global AI race is really headed.
So let's get into it. This is Truth Report. Let's find the truth.
Alright, let's set the scene. Chinese New Year 2025, the biggest annual consumer event on the planet. Billions of red packets exchanged digitally. And this year, China's tech titans decided this was the moment to go all in on AI. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, citing Morgan Stanley research, the estimated total spend across the major platforms hit approximately 8 billion yuan, that's about $1.1 billion US.
And to understand the scale of what happened here, you have to understand how red packets work in Chinese digital culture. These aren't just gifts. They're an engagement mechanism. When WeChat introduced digital red packets years ago, it onboarded hundreds of millions of users onto mobile payments practically overnight. The tech companies looked at that playbook and said, we can do the same thing for AI.
Exactly. So what did each company actually do? Let's break it down. Alibaba pushed its AI assistant hard through its ecosystem Alipay, Taobao, the whole suite. Baidu leveraged its ErnieBot platform. ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok and Douyin, deployed AI features across its short video platforms. And Tencent integrated AI capabilities into WeChat, which has over 1 billion monthly active users. Every single one of them used the holiday as a launchpad.
Now here's where the investigative question gets sharp. Morgan Stanley's analysts looked at what happened after the holiday ended, about a week out, and the early data tells a very mixed story. Some platforms saw significant user acquisition during the holiday blitz. Downloads spiked. Engagement numbers looked great on paper. But the critical metric isn't how many people downloaded an app during a holiday giveaway. It's how many came back the next week.
And that's the billion-dollar question, literally. Because what we've seen historically with these kinds of massive consumer acquisition campaigns in China is that retention rates can be brutally low. You can buy a download. You can buy a first session. But you cannot buy a habit. And AI assistants, unlike payment apps, don't have an obvious daily use case for most consumers yet.
Let's talk about who actually gained lasting traction, because the data is starting to differentiate winners from losers here. According to Morgan Stanley's analysis, not all platforms benefited equally from this spending spree. The platforms that had already built out robust AI ecosystems, meaning they had real utility beyond a gimmick, tended to retain users at higher rates than those that were essentially buying installs with cash incentives.
And this is where it gets really interesting from a competitive landscape perspective. ByteDance, with its Doubao AI assistant, reportedly saw some of the strongest engagement metrics. And that makes sense when you think about it. They already have a massive user base spending hours per day on Douyin. So integrating AI features into an existing behavior loop is fundamentally different from asking someone to open a brand new standalone AI app.
Baidu, on the other hand, faces a more challenging position. They've been positioning ErnieBot as their flagship AI product, and they've invested enormous sums in the underlying large language model technology. But Baidu's core product, search, has been losing ground to short video platforms and social commerce for years. So even if ErnieBot is technically impressive, the question is whether Baidu has the consumer distribution to make it stick.
And here's something that I think gets overlooked in a lot of the Western coverage of China's AI race. This isn't just about the technology. It's about distribution. In the United States, OpenAI built ChatGPT and it went viral essentially on its own because there was nothing else like it. In China, the market fragmented almost immediately. You have at least a dozen serious AI assistants competing for consumer attention, and they're all backed by companies with massive existing user bases.
Which brings us to the strategic calculus behind the spending. Why did these companies decide that Chinese New Year was the moment to burn through $1 billion? And the answer, I think, is that they're all terrified of being left behind. After DeepSeek's emergence shook the Chinese AI landscape, demonstrating that you could build competitive models at a fraction of the cost of the leading players, the established tech giants realized they couldn't just rely on having the best model. They needed to lock in users fast.
That's a crucial point. DeepSeek changed the game by showing that the moat in AI might not be in the model itself. If a relatively smaller player can build a competitive large language model, then the moat has to be somewhere else, in distribution, in ecosystem integration, in user habit formation. And that's exactly what this billion-dollar spending spree was about. It was a land grab for user attention before the market settled.
Now let's talk about who actually pays for all of this, because it's not the CEOs writing personal checks. These costs get absorbed into company budgets that ultimately affect shareholders, employees, and in some cases, consumers. Alibaba's stock, Baidu's stock, these companies are publicly traded. When you spend $1 billion on a marketing blitz, that's $1 billion that didn't go to research and development, or employee compensation, or reducing prices for consumers.
And the investor community is watching very closely. Morgan Stanley's report isn't just academic analysis, it's a signal to the market about which companies are spending wisely and which are throwing money at a problem. The analysts are essentially saying, we see what you did during the holiday, now show us the retention numbers. Show us that this wasn't just an expensive party.
Let me put this in a broader geopolitical context, because I think that's essential for understanding what's really happening. The Chinese government has made AI development a national strategic priority. The State Council's AI development plan, the various provincial AI initiatives, the regulatory framework that Beijing has built, all of it points toward a coordinated national effort to become the world leader in artificial intelligence.
And within that framework, these tech companies aren't just competing with each other. They're competing on behalf of national ambitions. When Alibaba or Tencent or ByteDance spend billions acquiring AI users, they're also building the data flywheel that makes their models better. More users means more interactions, which means more training data, which means better models, which means more users. That's the virtuous cycle every AI company in the world is chasing.
But here's the tension that nobody wants to talk about publicly. The Chinese AI regulatory environment is significantly more restrictive than the American one in certain key areas. Content moderation requirements, data localization rules, the algorithmic recommendation regulations, all of these create constraints that American AI companies don't face. So Chinese AI assistants are competing in a market where they simultaneously need to be incredibly engaging and carefully compliant.
Which creates a fascinating paradox. To win the consumer AI race in China, you need to be useful enough that people come back every day. But to be compliant with Chinese regulations, there are certain things your AI simply cannot do or say. The companies that navigate that tension most effectively will likely emerge as the winners. And that's a skill set that has no equivalent in Silicon Valley.
Now, let's zoom out and look at what this means for the global AI race. Because this billion-dollar red packet battle isn't happening in isolation. It's happening at the same time that OpenAI is pushing GPT models globally, Google is integrating Gemini across its products, and Meta is open-sourcing Llama models. The AI consumer market is becoming a genuine global competition.
And the strategies couldn't be more different. In the US, the approach has been largely technology first, build the most impressive model and users will come. In China, the approach is distribution first, get the users and build the model around their needs. Neither approach is obviously superior, and the billion-dollar New Year experiment is essentially a real-world test of the distribution-first hypothesis.
Here's what I find most revealing about the Morgan Stanley analysis. They're not just looking at which platform won the holiday period. They're looking at the cost of user acquisition versus lifetime value. And in AI, unlike in e-commerce or social media, the lifetime value equation is still almost entirely speculative. Nobody knows how to reliably monetize an AI assistant at consumer scale yet.
That's the elephant in the room. Every tech company in China, and frankly, every tech company in the world, is spending enormous sums to acquire AI users without a clear monetization model. ChatGPT plus subscriptions are one approach. Embedding AI into existing paid services is another. Advertising against AI interactions is a third. But none of these have been proven at the scale these companies need to justify billions in marketing spend.
So you have to ask the uncomfortable question, is this rational economic behavior, or is this a bubble? When 4 companies collectively spend over $1 billion in a single holiday period to acquire users for products that don't yet have clear revenue models, that looks an awful lot like the early days of the ride-sharing wars, or the food delivery subsidy battles, where companies burn through venture capital to buy market share they could never profitably serve.
And the historical parallels are instructive. Remember the Chinese bike-sharing bubble? Dozens of companies flooded cities with bicycles, spent billions on subsidies, and most of them went bankrupt. The survivors, primarily Meituan's bikes and Alibaba's Hello Bike, survived not because they spent the most, but because they integrated the bikes into larger ecosystems that could cross-subsidize the service.
That's exactly the model these AI companies are banking on. Alibaba doesn't need its AI assistant to make money directly if it drives more commerce through Taobao. Tencent doesn't need WeChat's AI features to generate direct revenue if they increase overall time spent in the WeChat ecosystem. ByteDance doesn't need Doubao to be profitable if it makes Douyin more engaging and keeps users from going to competitors.
But that logic has limits. If every major platform is integrating AI assistants as a feature rather than a product, then AI becomes a cost center across the entire Chinese tech industry simultaneously. And that's a fundamentally different situation than one company bearing the cost of innovation while others wait and see. Everyone is spending at once, which means the competitive advantage of having AI may quickly become zero. It's just table stakes.
And that brings us to what I think is the deepest insight in this story. The real competition in Chinese AI isn't between Alibaba and Tencent and ByteDance. It's between China's approach to AI adoption, top-down, subsidized, distribution first, and America's approach, market-driven, technology first, venture capital funded. The billion-dollar red packet battle is a single data point in a much larger experiment about which system produces better AI outcomes for actual users.
Let's talk about the consumer experience for a moment, because all of this corporate strategy means nothing if the products aren't actually good. And the early reviews from Chinese consumers are mixed. Many users reported that the AI features they encountered during the holiday period felt gimmicky, novelty interactions designed to facilitate the red packet distribution rather than genuinely useful AI capabilities.
Which is exactly the retention problem in microcosm. If your first experience with an AI assistant is a holiday gimmick, your mental model of that product is holiday gimmick. Changing that perception requires the AI to deliver genuine value in subsequent interactions, and that's a much harder problem than getting someone to download an app for a chance at a cash prize.
The Morgan Stanley analysts flagged this explicitly. They noted that the platforms which invested in showcasing genuine AI capabilities during the holiday period, things like AI-powered trip planning, personalized content recommendations, intelligent customer service, had better early retention signals than platforms that focused purely on the red packet giveaway mechanics.
So the lesson emerging from this billion-dollar experiment is one that should be obvious but apparently isn't to some corporate boardrooms: you can't shortcut your way to product-market fit. You can buy awareness. You can buy trial. But you cannot buy love. And in the consumer AI space, where switching costs are essentially zero, you can download a competitor's app in 30 seconds, love is the only thing that matters.
Now here's where I want to connect this to the broader power dynamics, because there's a layer to this story that goes beyond corporate competition. The Chinese government's interest in widespread AI adoption isn't purely economic. AI assistants that hundreds of millions of people interact with daily become critical information infrastructure. They shape how people access information, how they make decisions, how they understand the world.
And that raises profound questions about the relationship between these tech companies and the Chinese state. Every AI assistant operating in China must comply with content regulations that include restrictions on discussing certain political topics, historical events, and social issues. When you have a billion-dollar campaign to make AI assistants ubiquitous in daily life, you're simultaneously building the infrastructure for a particular kind of information environment.
To be clear, this isn't unique to China. In the United States, the concentration of AI development in a handful of companies raises its own concerns about corporate power over information. But the specific dynamics are different. In China, the regulatory relationship between tech companies and the state is more explicit and more direct. The companies know this, the government knows this, and the consumers are largely operating within that framework.
Which brings us to the synthesis of everything we've discussed today. What does the billion-dollar Chinese AI red packet battle actually tell us about where the world is headed?
First, it tells us that the AI consumer market is entering its most intense competitive phase. The era of one or two dominant chatbots is over. We're now in a world where every major tech platform is building AI capabilities, and the competition for user attention is going to be measured in billions of dollars, not millions.
Second, it tells us that distribution advantages may matter more than technological advantages in the consumer AI space. DeepSeek proved that model quality is converging. When multiple companies can build models that are good enough for most consumer use cases, the winner isn't the one with the best model, it's the one with the best distribution.
Third, it tells us that the monetization question remains unresolved. $1 billion spent, and nobody is closer to figuring out how to make consumer AI sustainably profitable. That's a red flag that investors and analysts are starting to take seriously.
Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, it tells us that AI adoption at scale is becoming a matter of national strategy, not just corporate competition. The Chinese government's implicit support for this kind of massive consumer acquisition spending reflects a belief that the country that gets its population using AI first will have a structural advantage in the decades to come.
And that's a belief that Washington shares, even if the mechanisms are different. The US approach relies more on private investment and less on coordinated national campaigns, but the underlying logic is the same: AI adoption is a strategic imperative.
So where does this leave us? $1 billion spent. Hundreds of millions of downloads recorded. Retention data still coming in. And a fundamental question hanging over all of it: in the race to build the AI-powered future, can you actually buy your way to the finish line?
The Morgan Stanley analysts are hedging their bets, and honestly, so should we. The data suggests that some platforms gained meaningful traction from the holiday spending, particularly those that integrated AI into existing user behaviors rather than treating it as a standalone novelty. But the long-term picture won't be clear for months.
What is clear is that the stakes keep rising. If $1 billion during one holiday period becomes the baseline for AI marketing in China, we're looking at an industry that could spend tens of billions annually on consumer acquisition alone. And that money has to come from somewhere, from investors, from other business lines, and ultimately, from the value that these AI assistants either do or don't create for users.
And for those of us watching from outside China, this story matters because it's a preview of what's coming everywhere. The AI marketing wars haven't really started in the West yet. But when they do, and they will, the Chinese experience will be the playbook that everyone studies.
The companies that burned cash without building genuine utility will be cautionary tales. The companies that used the spending spree to establish real user habits will be case studies in business school textbooks. And the difference between those two outcomes isn't about how much money you spend. It's about whether your product actually makes people's lives better.
Which, at the end of the day, is the only thing that has ever mattered in technology adoption. The graphical user interface won because it was genuinely better than command lines. The smartphone won because it was genuinely more useful than a flip phone. AI assistants will win, or lose, based on the same fundamental test.
The $1 billion is noise. The signal is in the retention data. And we'll be watching that data very closely in the weeks and months ahead.
That's right. And this is exactly the kind of story that Truth Report exists to cover. Not just the headline, tech companies spend $1 billion, but the deeper question of what it means, who it serves, and where it leads.
Because the truth isn't in the press releases. It's in the data that comes after the party's over.
So as we wrap up today, here's what we want you to take away. The AI race is no longer just a technology race. It's a distribution race, a monetization race, and increasingly, a geopolitical race. The $1 billion Chinese New Year battle is one of the first major skirmishes in what's going to be a much longer war.
And the outcome of that war will shape how billions of people interact with information, make decisions, and understand the world around them. That's not just a business story. That's a story about the future of human cognition.
So stay informed. Question the narratives. And remember, when someone spends $1 billion to give you something for free, you're not the customer. You're the product.
That's it for Truth Report today. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity.
Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers. And we'll keep digging for the truth. See you next time.
Stay sharp out there, everyone.